Good evening. I'm Michelle Perry, and I'm a regional leader of Decoding Dyslexia California here in San Diego. I'm also an attorney and a mother of a daughter with dyslexia. My guest tonight is Deborah Jacobson of Jacobson Education Law. Ms. Jacobson was one of the lead attorneys for the plaintiffs in the Berkeley Unified School District class action dyslexia lawsuit filed in federal district court. She's going to be discussing the proposed settlement that was recently reached with Berkeley Unified School District. Welcome. How's it going?
Hi, Michelle. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you so much for being here with us tonight. Tell us how you became involved in the Berkeley Unified School District lawsuit.
Yeah, so I think you and I had talked about this a little bit before. I have a private practice here in Berkeley, California. I'm a special education attorney. I represent parents of students with disabilities. And a huge part of my practice became students within the Berkeley Unified School District that were struggling to learn to read. So much so that I felt I could not continue to help kids on a one-to-one basis with these one-off cases. And also not just on a one-on-one basis, but because there was nothing within the district for me to seek as relief. So to change policies, procedures, I looked to a class action and partnered with DDCA and got some firms to help us with this case, and the rest is history.
That's wonderful. So who would benefit from this proposed settlement?
Yeah, I'm talking to Decoding Dyslexia, so obviously kids with dyslexia, but really this settlement is going to help all kids that struggle to learn to read for a number of different reasons. Yeah, it'll help all kids.
A lot of kiddos. So what role does an expert consultant play in a case like this?
So the hard part about this case was developing the relief. And in a lawsuit, the relief means, what the students are going to get if we win, right? So the relief needed to be a big plan. I'm not going to lie and say that the relief is ever easy, even with individual students when it comes to dyslexia, because every student that struggles to learn to read is an individual, right? And not one prescribed method or program will work for every kid. So we really needed, nationally recognized big time experts that in literacy to help us develop a plan for relief and kind of this ideal model for what a school district could do to help students, and particularly those with dyslexia.
Definitely the experts play a very important role. So who were the expert consultants?
So we worked with Louisa Moats. Jack Fletcher did a lot of consulting for the assessment piece for us to better understand that. And Mark Shin, who is an expert in MTSS, which is the multi-tiered system of supports for students with reading disabilities.
Wow, big names. So how did expert consultants help in developing and working towards a settlement? What is it that they did?
I mean, they were instrumental. I'm a lawyer now because of the years I got to spend with Louisa Moats. I like to think that I'm a literacy expert, but I'm not. But I mean, they were instrumental in every piece of this piece and every piece of this settlement. I mean, I'm forever eternally grateful to Louisa Moats. And Mark and Jack too, but Louisa really, spent so much time and energy. She's so well respected. The district really respected her as well. And she was a part of all of it through all along. And so was Mark. They really were instrumental in the entire settlement agreement.
That's wonderful. How long does BUSD have to implement the literacy improvement plan program under the proposed settlement?
So we have the literacy improvement program is a 3-year kind of improvement program. It's obviously not limited to 3 years, but we have 3 years of expert involvement and a court monitor that the court is going to be getting reports to ensure that the settlement is implemented. So it is a process, and that was hard fought to get a 3-year monitor of this, and that's just to ensure that all of the steps are put in place and that the fidelity and the implementation is happening, and ensuring that the experts have a say in all of these key elements of the literacy improvement program.
So when you say that you had some difficulty getting this 3 years of expert monitoring, can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, to have a court be monitoring what you're doing and to be getting court reports, we have a court monitor that will be involved in this. That keeps the case open, in a sense, and keeps lawyers involved, and that's not ideal for the district in the sense of they, really want to be doing this on their own. So, I think we really wanted it to be an extended period of time so that we could ensure all of these things are put in place. A lot of it is in year one, but then the monitoring and the expert involvement goes through the years. There is stuff in year 2 and year three, but a lot of it happens early on.
And so what safeguards are in place to make sure that the program is implemented well?
Yeah, so that's exactly what I was just talking about. We have built in a monitoring system within the literacy improvement program and within the settlement agreement, where we have outside, impartial, nationally recognized experts being a part of all of it. They don't work for the district. They don't work for plaintiffs. They are experts and they are impartial, and their job is to help the district implement this, because there's a lot of pieces to it and a lot of pieces that they will need consultation with. And then we have a court monitor. So the court monitor will be getting quarterly reports as to the implementation and the progress of the literacy improvement program.
Very cool. The settlement now requires BUSD to screen all K-8 students for reading difficulties. How does this differ from what BUSD was previously doing?
So things changed over the years, but if we're talking about screening in particularly, it's my understanding that the district was using a language-based reading core program to screen the students, opposed to a research-based screener that is impartial, basically. So they were using the language-based screeners, and there was no real data collection. So we have, that was another key part of the settlement agreement, were these research-based authentic reading testing systems and benchmark assessments.
So that data collection piece and just providing a lot of data points to provide information regarding progress.
Yeah.
So how critical was requiring screening of all K-8 students, starting in kindergarten, as a first step in identifying struggling readers, including those for risk of dyslexia?
So we have early screening, and that was, the K-3 in particular was, according to our experts, kind of, the most important part of this monitoring and kind of early intervention process. The experts made it very clear to us early on, and this goes back to that issue of what does relief look like for all this huge body of students that are struggling. And the experts made it really clear that without research-based, authentic reading testing systems to understand where kids are and to identify them early, that the whole system falls apart. You know, and it just goes back to the wait to fail method, right? Where kids are getting, maybe we have all these great interventions in place now and a lot of teacher training and, you know, teachers understanding the science of reading, but no authentic way to identify them early on and get those kids into the reading interventions early. So, you know, that was a key aspect to this. You know, especially this case became a lot more than special education when we got into the science of reading, right? So all of us lawyers, I'm a special education attorney. So this, you know, I was very familiar with the special education issues with reading and dyslexia. But, you know, probably a year into the case, it became clear to me that the core reading program outside of the special education instruction was a huge problem. And that if we could, you know, get, you know, structured literacy and research-based instruction in the general education setting and have these kids, you know, the benchmark assessments being done early and often, you know, that would likely reduce, you know, the need for special education interventions and even special education referrals and assessments. So this case became a lot more than just special education pretty early on, and that became clear to us.
Right, and really making sure that kids get that help during those critical periods early before
Yeah.
it's too late and waiting till they fail and are frustrated with school. How often will students be universally screened?
So this is in the literacy improvement program, and I haven't reviewed it for a few 9 months, but I do. I think it was fall, winter, spring. Are the formal assessments that we agreed to, and then students with IEPs will be, you know, given benchmark assessments and monitored much more frequently according to their IEPs, which, you know, our experts will be in there helping the district develop these systems to implement, you know, consistent progress monitoring and data collection to ensure that students are making progress.
One of the stated goals in the proposed settlement is to develop programs to improve general education reading and language arts achievement for all students, especially those students with or at risk for reading disabilities, including dyslexia. It really sounds like this settlement is about helping more than just students with dyslexia. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and that's what I was just sharing in terms of, you know, this case becoming, you know, as much of an effort to make sure kids are getting what they need in the general education setting as it was to make sure that kids are getting what they need in the special education setting. And, you know, in the literacy improvement program, there are tiers. And within each tier, that's the MTSS model that I was talking about. You know, and Mark Shin really helped us kind of weed out everything and ensure that each tier, you know, kids are being taken care of. And we are doing everything we can early to make sure that they are getting what they need.
Right. And so what reforms will Berkeley Unified be required to do to improve reading outcomes for everyone, for all?
Well, that's a very broad question. So, I mean, the reforms, you know, that's.
Well, you talked about the experts, you know, conducting a review with the outside experts and what more?
Yeah, so I mean, there's new policies, procedures, and systems put in place for each one of the tiers. And you know, I mean, we could go through the literacy improvement program, but it's very long and it's very detailed in terms of all of the different goals that the literacy improvement program is put in place for, and then, prescriptions as to how the district is to achieve those goals. So it's really a matter of, a complete overhaul of literacy, the literacy programs within the district. And I should say, I think it's not necessarily an overhaul in that the settlement agreement does not require Berkeley to change its core reading program, but it did require it to add a research-based phonics component and to monitor and do a new assessment of the core reading program with the experts to ensure that it is sufficient with that new phonics program supplement. So TCRWP, which is it's a language-based reading program, was their core reading instruction, and that did not have a phonics component.
Right.
And so they did choose during the course of settlement, during the course of, not settlement, but the course of the case, right? This went on for years. So during the course of the case, they did implement a phonics program, and they chose Fast Track. My daughter was a kindergartner the first year that they used Fast Track. So I had this very surreal experience, hearing about it on the legal side, and then volunteering in my daughter's classroom and seeing what it looked like, which was really cool. And seeing my daughter with the little Elfie, animal that they use for the phonics, and hearing my daughter learn phonics. And, that was incredible for me in the sense of seeing how it was benefiting her, how it was benefiting, the kids in her classroom. It was cool that I was able to see it implemented. I also saw kind of, how hard it was for the teachers to, I think it was 30 minutes a day, is what they were starting out with, and kind of the big deal that was, from a legal sense, it was it's just 30 minutes. We're demanding it. And then seeing what that really meant in the classroom, 30 minutes for a kindergartner is a long time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was interesting and cool that I got to see it in that way.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So why is it an important requirement in the settlement that Tier 2 and Tier 3 interventions align with the International Dyslexia Association's knowledge and practice standards for teachers of reading?
Why is it important that they're aligned?
Why is that important?
Yeah, I
Those
mean,
are wondering.
yeah, so I mean, that was, that's general language that we used. We were in agreement, and Louisa Motes, our expert, plays a big role in the IDA. And, everything that within their guidelines has been supported by, decades worth of research. And the district was generally in agreement with that, and that was kind of a way around this issue of, prescribing a particular program, which no expert is ever comfortable with, being Wilson is the one that's going to fix everything. The district did select Wilson as their Tier 3 after a lot of, I think they tried a number of different ones, and the Wilson program got the best feedback and, is supported, is in line with the IDA practice standards. But yeah, that was a key element to the agreement, was getting rid of the old programs and putting in new research-based programs.
The complaint cites some disturbing research about some very popular reading interventions that are used not only at Berkeley Unified, but also nationwide. And I want to take a moment to read the language from the complaint. It states, the two primary reading interventions provided by BUSD are LLI, or Leveled Literacy Intervention, and Reading Recovery. LLI is not specifically designed or supported by research to meet the needs of students with reading disorders, Similarly, several researchers have concluded that reading recovery should not be used with these students as it teaches them to guess words rather than reading words phonologically. Indeed, reading recovery has been proven to further harm students with reading disorders instead of helping them. What provisions have been made in the proposed settlement to ensure that these two reading interventions are not used for students with suspected reading disorders?
Yeah, I was getting this question a lot when the literacy improvement program first came out, because there was some confusion around this. And you know, this goes back to that, you know, us really being conscious and aware that this is more than a special education issue, right? With this language-based learning. Um, so we were able to get provisions within the literacy improvement program and the settlement agreement. Um, let me just say, the district was not willing to get rid of the programs entirely. And what that means is, you know, and this is something that I learned that I didn't know, you know, these programs are so incredibly expensive and require, you know, ongoing training for teachers that they're doing. They're embedded within, you know, they have a reading recovery program in Berkeley. So it wasn't something that was easily like, oh, we've spent, you know, however many, I don't know, hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars on this. Like, we're not just going to throw it away, because it does help some students. And I think that that is true. You know, I think students that don't have language-based learning disabilities and that come from language-rich environments can benefit, you know, it's one-to-one. So a lot, you know, kids that don't have learning disabilities can benefit from one-to-one instruction in a reading program, you know, but we wanted to make sure that the kids with reading disabilities were not going to get those programs. So basically, you know, what it says in the literacy improvement program is it allows for LLI, level literacy and reading recovery, to be used to support some students who require tier 2 and tier 3 support. But for kids even with suspected reading disabilities, so if there's any reason to suspect that the child has a language-based learning disability, such as dyslexia, the interventions will be limited to documented exceptional learning circumstances. And what that means is that they have to fail with the selected programs that are aligned with the IDA in order for them to fall back on LLI or reading recovery. So it can't be a go-to. It can't be the first intervention. It can't be, you know, the second that a learning disability is suspected, they are going to use the programs that are aligned with IDA. If everything else fails, then they could try and go back to the LLI and reading recovery.
Yeah, you know, it's pretty powerful to read. Reading recovery has been proven to further harm students with reading disorders instead of helping them. And that's a pretty powerful statement. But
I mean, that was, you know, we got that statement from the research, you know, and
powerful.
yeah, and I keep saying, you know, when I talk about this case and when I talk about literacy in general, that you know, it's an area of academics that has more research conducted than any other, and it's literally decades long of research that you know, supports the science of reading. And language-based literacy does not fall into that category. And when you have a language-based learning disability, language-based intervention is harmful.
The settlement agreement also says many students identified with reading disabilities or at risk for reading disabilities may not require special education if provided early and appropriately intensive research-based reading instruction. BUSD is committed to promoting early and wide successful reading. The long-term goal is to significantly reduce the proportion of students at risk for reading failure. So what changes will need to be made at BUSD to reduce the number of students at risk for reading failure in the general education setting?
Yeah, so I mean, I've given this example in a number of talks that I've given before, just because it really helped me to understand what this looked like in terms of how kids were learning how to read with TCRWP and LLI, and how a learning disability can be missed because of it. So I always give this example of, um, my daughter's friend who sat at her table when I was volunteering in the classroom. They were reading a book, and the way that language-based literacy, it theoretically, and a lot of kids do learn how to read this way, right? Just not kids with language-based learning disabilities, or kids that don't come from language-rich environments. And the way that I like to illustrate this is my daughter, I'm from Colorado originally. My little sister rides horses. My daughter has been to like rodeos and all of these things in Colorado. And there's a book, one of these level books. I think it was like level A or level B. It was when they were first in kindergarten, and before they were doing the phonics instruction. And my daughter was looking at the book, and it's a horse jumping over a barrel, right? And it says, the horse jumps over the barrel, or something along those lines. And my daughter was able to look at the picture and look at the words and associate, the sounds with what she knew the picture to be, the horse, and she sees the horse. And so she was making those connections. And then she said barrel. And, she's making the connections with all of those sounds, the B, the A's, the R's. She was making those connections. The little girl that was sitting next to her, I was volunteering in class, and it was the same book, and she was reading it. It might've been a different week. And she was like, she was struggling with it. She had been really struggling to learn to read. She was way far behind my daughter. And it was something that as a layperson, not a teacher, I was noticing. And I was thinking to myself, oh, this, there's a huge difference here. But she looked at the book and she said, the horse jumps over the big can. That was what, and that's what it is, right? It's a big can. She didn't have that experience and that language base that my daughter had of knowing that. So it immediately put her at a disadvantage. In that sense, I think it was towards the end of the year that the phonics instruction started, and she started to improve. But she, at that point, had already been so far behind. At that point, my daughter was like at levels D and E, and she was still at level A and B. And so it was like one of these things that I even brought it up to the teacher. I said the little girl's name, and I said, she's really struggling. She's really far behind. And the teacher said, yeah, I think it'll get better next year. I think it's a language issue. And I give this example because, now my daughter's in third grade, and now that little girl, I know her and I know her parents, and she just got assessed for special education this year. She still can't read. Right. So it was like, it's one of these things that had phonics been implemented right away, had there been a good core reading program where she was learning phonics, and, it was a different program, had there been benchmark assessments that were objective, that didn't allow her to look at pictures and guess, they're objective research-based assessments. Would she need to be in special education now? Would she need those more intensive interventions? I don't know. I mean, it depends on the nature of her dyslexia, because she is dyslexic. In addition to that, she doesn't have the language background that my daughter had. But I use this example to say, if those benchmark assessments were done early on that kindergarten year, if there was objective data, the teacher actually even told me at one point, well, I want to refer her, but I can't, because we're showing on the oral reading assessment that I did, she was doing okay, and we're going to wait. Her parents actually wanted to wait too, but that's how it can prevent a special education referral. That's how it can early intervention. If kids can learn how to read in the general education setting, they don't need to move up into those tiers. They don't need a special education assessment. And as every parent of a child with dyslexia knows, like these children are bright. All of these kids are bright and amazing and capable. So give them that opportunity early, and I think it will save the districts a lot of money. I think it'll save, I think the special education referrals would drop tremendously. It's that I feel very strongly about that, and that's why I said, that's why I became so focused on the core literacy program as well as the special education supports.
Right. And I think another thing we need to talk about is the emotional impact that struggling academically has on our kids, right? So it's not just, obviously the young lady you talked about struggled academically, but I mean, I can't imagine what that would feel like to go to school and see your peers advancing, and she's that must have been very difficult for her, and it's difficult for kids all over. And it's like you said, if some of these appropriate interventions, screening, all these things that this settlement is proposing were implemented, maybe we would curb some of that, right?
Yeah, as a lawyer, I see it constantly, right? It's never, by the time someone gets to me, right, maybe they've worked with an advocate, maybe they've reached out to Decoding Dyslexia, maybe they've really tried to work with the district. It takes a lot for a parent to get a lawyer involved. That's it's a very intimidating process. And parents are usually at the end of their rope by the time they get to me. And they also are dealing with depressed and anxious kids who can't read, right? It's never a kid that just can't read. By the time they get to me, it's a kid that can't read and has incredibly low self-esteem, is talking about wanting to kill themselves, is, the comorbid disabilities that are inherent with something that is, so embarrassing and hard as peers. Every single student I work with, especially around 3rd and 4th grade, my child's coming home saying they're stupid, they don't want to go to school anymore. So we're dealing with school refusal, school avoidance, depression, anxiety, low self-esteem. And like I said, I saw it with my daughter's friend, outside of the legal aspect of everything. This little girl started acting out in class, and, it became a whole nother issue. And, that is also really not uncommon, where like behavioral issues start to happen. And then that's why they get referred for special education, right? So it becomes
expulsion and suspensions, and then that leads to perhaps contact with the juvenile justice system. It's just, it's bad all the way around.
It's bad all the way around. And what makes it worse is that there's all these things that we know work and can help this. And I guess I say it makes it worse, but that was kind of, that was the whole reasoning behind this case. It's it's frustrating when when the answers are there and the research is there.
Right.
Yeah.
But getting people to do the right thing is hard sometimes. What changes will be required in the settlement for special education students and students with a 504 plan?
Yeah, so 504, it was included in the lawsuit. So it's not just students with IEPs. There will be progress monitoring, goals. The way that goals are written, the interventions that are provided will also be research-based and aligned with the IDA standards.
All right, so how was BUSD determining if a student was eligible for special education under the category of specific learning disability?
So this is a whole nother ball of wax. They were using the severe discrepancy model. And, you know, I want to be clear, you'll see in the settlement and in the literacy improvement program that the SELPA, BUSD's SELPA and BUSD itself, during the course of this lawsuit, again, remember I was saying that a lot of changes were happening while we were litigating, and a legal term for that is curing, right? They were curing a lot of these issues during the course of the litigation. So they agreed to patterns of strength and weaknesses. I do want to be clear that our experts, especially Mark Shin, is not a fan of the patterns of strengths and weaknesses. Inherent in kind of standardized testing and the way that data is analyzed by school psychologists. According to our experts, you know, and Jack Fletcher especially, a lot of the same issues can arise with the patterns of strength and weaknesses. However, more kids are identified from a statistical standpoint is what we're seeing with patterns of strength and weaknesses. So just severe discrepancy model basically said, you know, they test a student's intellect, basically ability and achievement. And if there is a severe discrepancy, and there's also evidence of a processing disorder, that was how they were identifying students with learning disabilities. The research and even the IDEA acknowledges the issues with the severe discrepancy model. In California, it gets particularly sticky because they can't do intellectual testing on African-American students under Larry P. And it was just misinterpretation of data. So the patterns of strength and weaknesses theoretically looks at all of the data, all of the test scores, and identifies where students are weaker without needing that standard deviation, you know, discrepancy. So it is an improvement. You know, Mark Shin and Jack Fletcher feel strongly that the only way to identify student, the only real legit way and research-based way to identify students with learning disabilities is through the MTSS model. So basically, you know, tiered interventions and using all the data from those tiered interventions to determine whether or not a student has a learning disability. That was another really fun experience for me. I got to go to Oklahoma.
Nice.
I say I got to go to Oklahoma. Let me just say that was not the great part for me. I was joking that, you know, that was one of my big contributions to the case. But it was actually really interesting. It was a big conference that Mark Shin and Jack Fletcher Mark Shin put on, and Jack Fletcher was presenting. And you know, this goes to the kind of the politics behind reading too. You know, a lot of the more conservative states still, you know, follow the science of reading, where it tends to be more of the liberal states have shifted towards what Mark Shin calls play-based learning, or language-based literacy. But you know, it was a big conference with all these teachers. You know, it was all the teachers and administrators from schools all over Oklahoma. It was a huge conference, and they were teaching the science of reading. And in one of the breakout sessions, you know, they were playing videos of these kids reading grade level text. And it was like, raise your hand when you hear a problem, you know, raise your hand when you feel like this child might have a reading disability. And so they would like have the sample kid of, you know, the kid that could read their grade level text perfectly. And then they were playing like, you know, videos of multiple kids. And it was one of those experiences where it was like, you know, everybody raised their hand. I say that because it is that clear and that simple for parents, really, you know, and that's what I've learned out of all these years of doing this. It's like parents know when there's a problem. And it was just like, you know, me sitting with my daughter and her friend and seeing that huge discrepancy between the two of them, especially as the year went on. Like, she just wasn't learning. My daughter was skyrocketing ahead of her. You know, so that's what MTSS model theoretically is, right? It's this idea of providing research-based interventions through the tiers and using the data and using our own observations to, make logical conclusions. The assessment process is flawed in many ways, but it is what we have, and the law does allow for it. Patterns of strength and weaknesses, and even severe discrepancy is allowed under the IDEA and state and federal law. So it is what it is what it is. But patterns of strength and weaknesses, I do feel is a vast improvement over the severe discrepancy model. My hope is that all school districts will move towards an MTSS model for identification at some point in the future.
Great. People often think that plaintiffs' attorneys get rich off of lawsuits. And there were 4 law firms that represented the plaintiffs here. Jacobson Education Law, Disability Rights Education and Defense Fund, King and Spalding LLP, and Goodwin Procter LLP. So it's my understanding that both King and Spalding and Goodwin and Procter did this on a pro bono basis. What did your firm and DREDF, incur in fees over the 4 years it took to litigate this?
Yeah.
And how much will your recoup be in legal fees?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked this. It is a touchy subject in terms of, class actions in general have this reputation of being huge money makers, right? So let me just say, first of all, courts have put in place a process to oversee attorneys' fees in class action cases. So it's not like the courts are monitoring it. It was, over the course of many years became an issue, and case law came out to make it to where, class actions can't just be a moneymaker. Plaintiffs have to benefit from it. In this case, it's not a typical class action lawsuit, first of all, because all the relief that we were requesting, right, that's what we wanted for the change. It's called injunctive relief. So there was no money involved in this case. There's no cash rewards for the students. The reading improvement plan, I'm assuming, is going to cost, an incredible amount of money for the district. And that, so it's not that this is a cheap or inexpensive relief just because there's no dollar bills being paid out. But first of all, yes, the big firms that came in, and one of them that wasn't mentioned is Venable. Shout out to Venable, because they had a lot of amazing attorneys that helped us through this too. So we started out with Goodwin Procter, then Venable, and now King and Spalding. And those firms took on a huge part of the expense of this case. And to litigate a class action, the expenses alone, depositions and court fees and all of that, are hundreds of thousands of dollars. I can't even imagine how much money they spent on this case. And they did it all for free, pro bono. It was just, it's incredible that they got involved and they got just as passionate and reared up about this case as we did. These big, huge firms, they have pro bono practices where they give back. And, this was one of the give back cases. I don't think any of us expected to be litigating for this long, and the amount that it was spent was incredible. So I am forever grateful to all of the firm attorneys. Brendan Radke was, my partner through all of this. He was incredible. So yes, getting to the point though, DREDF and myself were seeking fees all along. I am a solo practitioner. So what my fees costed, what I billed out was over $1 million. I mean, and I stopped billing about a year ago. I haven't even billed since. There'd probably be another, $40K or something. But what's not put into my bill is the fact that, for a good year or 2 years, I couldn't take private cases, right? So there's an incredible amount of debt that comes with litigating a class action. Even if there's no expenses being put out, there's no money coming in. And DREDF is a nonprofit organization that does incredible work and relies on funding and grants. So they don't have, the funds to do this kind of work pro bono either. So at the end of the day, we got an award, or we negotiated, between DREDF and our fees were way over $1 million, between the two firms that were seeking fees. And we settled for 350,000. So 175 to DREDF and 175 to me. And that barely, it won't cover the debt that I went into because of this case. So it was never about the money. It couldn't be about the money, or else I wouldn't be able to do it. This was a heart case, and it still is a heart case. It's kind of my self-care, right? Doing something over and over and wanting a different result. This is how we got the different result finally. So yeah, the 100, we each got 175, split between the two of us, and it's a very small percentage. I think it was, very minimal percentage of what our actual fees were. Defendants, lawyers get paid no matter what. They get an hourly rate no matter what. They don't, whether they win, whether they lose, they don't have to negotiate their fees. They're getting paid all along. And I can only imagine that their fees were much, much higher than what we're getting. So when we say plaintiffs' attorneys get paid, maybe in, like those cases where they're suing Verizon cell phone or something. But this is civil rights litigation, and nobody's getting rich off of it. That's for sure.
Well, you're amazing, and everyone else who was involved. I kudos to you guys. This is such an important case that's going to help so many students and save lives, really. So this is incredible work, and it's not for the faint at heart, right? It requires sleepless nights, time away from your family. It's just the amount of sacrifice that went into this case, I think is immeasurable. So I just think you're amazing.
Thank you.
You really are amazing. It's incredible. Class lawsuits are hard, right? But a class action, that's another level, just the amount of work, and just the toll.
The toll it took on all of us. And like I said, the firm attorneys were incredible. They didn't have the specialized knowledge of special ed law, so they learned it throughout, and they were just incredible. And that was all pro bono. So will forever be grateful to, Shane Brunn, he's at King and Spalding now, and Brendan Radke, and a number of other attorneys that worked on this case. I think we had dozens of firm attorneys working on this case throughout the years.
Hands on deck, right?
All hands on deck. And, the plaintiffs too. The emotional toll that it took on all of them, they had to get deposed. It was incredibly hard for all of them, and they put in so much into this case. And one of the parents, we were talking, her daughter, and student C, I think it was student B, she was saying, I'm a hero, and we were saying, yes, you are. They all are heroes. So yeah, I think I told you before, when I first told them about the settlement, like, it was teary. And these, they've been by my side and working their butts off, just like the lawyers, and have really, all of that time was not compensated. They were two of the students now have graduated.
Wow.
Right? They graduated. One of them graduated the first year of the lawsuit, and these parents are still in there fighting, so it's just we had an incredible plaintiffs. We're really lucky for that, and they were warriors. I'm grateful to them, grateful to all the lawyers on this. Larissa Cummings started this case with me at DREDF. She's now retired. This case has been going so long that Shane Brunn and I are the last ones standing. We've been through a lot of attorneys and a lot of different, firms and everything. So it's been a long road. We're so happy that the outcome was this good.
It's incredible. the work you guys did, incredible. And I think it's going to serve as a model to other districts of what's possible and what should be happening in our schools,
I
right?
hope so. I hope so. I mean, you know, if this was litigated in federal court, right? And there were a lot of eyes on this case. Obviously, there's no precedent because we didn't get a judge's order at the end of the day. But I think what was learned is that, you know, everybody's at risk now. You know, all of the school districts are at risk if they're not doing what's right. And I can't tell you how many lawyers have reached out to me and how many parents have reached out to me and said, how do we do this in our district?
Right.
Everybody wants to do this in their district. And I think, it is a big eye opener for all districts, especially in California where the reading,
Oh yeah, the literacy crisis. We talked about that during our last interview, but it's unfortunate that it requires litigation to get the support that our students need in our districts.
yeah.
It shouldn't be that way. It's unfortunate, but I'm just really grateful. And I know many people are, that there are people like you out there willing to do this work because it isn't easy and it's not for everyone.
Yeah.
And I just hope that everybody watching this understands. I mean, it's hard work, all that you did, the sacrifices. So this is incredible.
Thank you.
And I'm just so thankful that you did this, and all those involved, and the kids, the students, really, like you said, warriors out there, and just putting themselves out there, and just serving as an inspiration
Yeah.
for all of us.
Yeah, I mean, and all the parents, I mean, even decoding dyslexia, it's like I don't even want to, I don't want to minimize like the impact of all, grassroots organizations and these programs, and the advocacy of every single parent out there puts pressure on these districts too. So it's, if parents weren't out there advocating, there would be no reason for them to settle a case like this, and there would be no. So it's definitely not a few lawyers that do this work or got this case done.
Well, it takes a village, right? I mean, we all have to work together and do what's right for kids. And so I'm really excited to hear that there are people reaching out for more information on how to replicate this in their district. So we have to do something to help kids. Literacy is just incredibly important, and we cannot afford to stay silent any longer. So, you kind of talked about really quickly about the district, and, they get paid no matter what, right? And I just wonder, how much did they get paid for their participation in this lawsuit? And it seems to me that rather than throwing that money away to legal fees, it would have been better spent on our students, investing in them and improving reading outcomes for them.
Yeah, I mean, that's always the case with special education, right? It's, this system that's put in place that requires lawyers to fight for kids, and completely agree. I hope that, I know that there's a lot of things in play and at the state level in terms of research-based, benchmark assessments and reading interventions and all the work Decoding Dyslexia does. At that level, if that money can be better spent, and things can get better without lawyers having to get involved, and I hope it does.
So very briefly, why don't you tell me what you hope would come out of this lawsuit, of this settlement, and what other school districts can learn from this federal class action lawsuit?
I hope that school districts, I mean, I always say this, California, we'd love to tout how much we love science, right? Believe in science. And somehow I think it was Louisa Moats that made the joke, like Berkeley has all these signs that say we believe in science, We love everybody. She was like, for a community that believes in science, they sure don't believe in science, right? Because the fight and the pushback.
Right, right.
So what is my hope? My hope is that all districts create programs like this and start to serve students and teach them how to read. You know, we talk about the achievement gap between BIPOC and white students, and you know, let's start with teaching them how to learn to read. That's, you know, I mean, my hope is like very basic. It, you know, going back to case law, reading really is the basement floor of educational opportunity. So, you know, we know how to teach kids how to read. There's decades worth of science and research that shows how to teach kids how to read. So I hope we go back to that, you know, and I hope that districts see how much money they can save. You know, one Linda Mood Bell case, you know, can pay the salary of an incredible, you know, teacher that is trained in all of these programs and can provide interventions. So I just think of all those one-offs, you know, of all the parents have to seek reimbursement or go outside of their districts to get very expensive reading interventions. I mean, the cost of reading interventions are insane, and that is not accessible to a huge population. So it is my hope that, you know, everyone has access to learning how to read.
Well, Ms. Jacobson, thank you very much for coming and talking with me today. And I know that our viewers are going to really be fascinated by the work that you've done. All this information that we learned tonight about this exciting class action settlement. I mean, it's wonderful to hear your stories and the work that is being done to help our students, and that we have a lot to look forward to. So thank you so much for coming here and or speaking with me tonight. And good luck to you. And I hope you continue to fight on.
Thank you so much. So good talking to you.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.